Okay, folks, I'm going to pick up where I left off with the last video, which we had just gone through the distribution screen. I think I hopefully made that as clear as I could, what you have to do on this screen. But obviously, if there's any questions, let me know. That means the next screen on the list, the next set of decisions is the internet marketing, right? So you might remember a while back in one of the other videos I mentioned there are multiple different distribution channels, right? The primary one I would say that you're going to put most of your time and energy into is the wholesale channel. So you produce the shoes, you sell them to a wholesaler in a given region, they sell them to retailers, the retailers sell them to the consumers, right? Um, and there's a markup at each stage of that, right? So your wholesale price is not the price that the customer pays in the store. Keep that in mind. That's going to be important when we start talking about this internet stuff. The second distribution channel that we've already talked about is the clearance channel, where you're sending your excess inventory that you have left over from the previous year to the local flea markets just to get rid of them. Okay. Uh, Third distribution channel is the internet. So your customers can buy directly from you online. Okay. And so you have to make decisions with respect to selling the shoes online in each of the four regions. Okay. So here, we haven't talked about price yet, right? We haven't gotten to the point where you're setting a price for your product. This is your first chance to do that. So here in the internet marketing, you decide for each region what do you want your retail price to be? This is what the customer will actually pay. You decide how much you want to spend on search engine optimization, advertising. Okay. Again, search engine advertising, any kind of marketing has the potential to boost the perceived value of your products, but obviously there's also a cost associated with it. Free shipping, right? Are you going to offer it or not? Okay, and that's really a function of effective price, right? Because if you offer free shipping, somebody's still paying the shipping. It's just not the customer. It's going to be on you, so it's going to have an effect on your costs. Okay. Um, Something to keep in mind with the retail price. And we'll talk about this more in just a second when we get to the wholesale marketing. What you have to remember is, well, a lot of things, but number one, there are relatively few people who are willing to buy shoes online. Okay, so you can look at the details of what percentage of the market will buy on the internet. And I bring that up because I've had companies in the past who have decided that they were going to win this thing by just never mind the wholesale. We're going to dominate the internet. Okay, it's certainly a strategy you can pursue as long as you understand that you're dealing with a niche market. There's relatively few potential customers. Okay, that might be okay because, like we keep talking about, market share is not the ultimate sign of success. Right? You might be able to be very profitable and generate great returns just in the internet market, but your volumes are definitely going to be smaller. Okay, as long as you're aware of that. Um, Something else you have to think about when you're thinking about your approach to the internet. Uh, the vast majority of your shoes are going to be sold through the retailers because that's where most customers want to buy. Right. What that means is you need to have retail stores that are willing to sell your product. Okay. Now, you'll see in a minute on the next screen, um, you start off with a certain number of retail outlets that are willing to sell your product. That number can either go up over time or it can go down. There can be retail stores that say, I'm not going to sell these shoes anymore for a variety of reasons, right? Or you may attract more retailers, okay? Obviously, the more retailers you have your shoes in, the higher your perceived value is going to be because more customers are going to run into your product. They're going to see them when they walk into the store, okay? Um, One of the things, and there are many, but one of the things that affects the willingness of the retail outlets to sell your shoes is your internet price. Okay, because when you think about it, um, you have a wholesale price that we're going to see in just a second, but you have the internet price that the customer pays. Your wholesale price gets marked up 20% to the wholesalers, it gets marked up 20% again to the retailers. So what a customer actually pays when they walk into the store for a pair of your shoes is 40% higher than your wholesale price. Okay. If you have an internet price that's below that retail price in the store, right? If your retail price online is less than 40% over your wholesale price, what you're doing is you're cutting the legs out from underneath your retailers, right? Customers can get the shoes cheaper buying directly from you than what they'll have to pay if they walk into a retail store. Okay. If you're trying to totally dominate online, then maybe that's okay. But if you recognize that the vast majority of the buying public is going to want to walk into the store, those retailers are not going to be happy with you, right? They don't like the fact that you're stealing business from them, essentially. And so what you'll see happen is your um, number of retailers that are willing to carry your shoes will go down over time, and that can cause serious problems for you. As you're going through these screens, and again, you kind of have to bounce back and forth among some of them. But you can actually see it'll give you some warnings in certain situations, right? So let's say in North America, I'm going to lower my, well, right now it's telling me at a retail price of $67. That's exactly 40% over my wholesale price. Okay. If I lower this to 60, it's going to give me a red warning that says, hey, you're going to piss people off, right? You are conflicting your channels. You're going to upset the retailers, which might lead fewer of them to carry your product. Okay, so keep that in mind. You'll get those warnings to help. Um, Down here, and you'll see this on the next screen as well, now for the first time we're starting to get a sense for what your margins might be in each of the four regions, right? Because you've made all the decisions about your product and your operations and your capacity and your human resources, all of those things that have an effect on your costs. Now you're making decisions about your price, okay? Price and cost. You're starting to get a picture of what your margins might be, right? Keeping in mind that all of these numbers you see on these screens are pro formas, they're forecasts, they're estimates based on a lot of unknowns, right? Because the conditions next year are going to be different than they were last year. So, for example, I don't know if I really explicitly pointed this out, but when you're making those decisions about your product, let's say you're going to make 7-star shoes, whatever your decision is, you have to decide on the combination of materials and styling, and TQM will get you the 7-star shoes you want, right? Well, the higher your percentage of superior materials, the higher your cost is going to be for producing the shoes, right? I know we talked about that. What I'm not sure we talked about is the fact that how much higher is something you can't know for sure, because the cost of superior materials depends on the demand for superior materials. So if you and a bunch of the other companies all collectively start using a higher percentage of superior material, those material costs will go up because demand will go up. At the same time, the cost of the standard materials will go down, right? We can't know that until after the year happens because we can't know what decisions the other companies are making. Okay, so when you look at all of these numbers and these profit margins and all that, just remember that these are not guaranteed. These are forecasts. This is what companies do when it's December and they're making plans for the coming year. You try to get the best forecast you can, but you have to accept that it depends on variables that are uh, to a certain extent unknown. Okay, so keep that in mind. Um, Something else that you're going to want to look at, and this is going to be more dramatic in other cases. But right here, I'm seeing a 25% operating margin in North America, and I'm seeing a 14% operating margin in Latin America. Okay, you need to understand why. And luckily, you've got all of this data here, all of these numbers, forecasted numbers, that can help you understand why, right? And it may be something that you can't immediately change. It may not be something that you feel like you need to address, but at least if you know what the cause is, then you can think about should you address it, how should you address it, and how long is it going to take you to address it, right? Because it may take maybe something that doesn't happen immediately. It takes some a couple of years to fix whatever the underlying problem is. Okay. Um, Down here, these decisions up here, and this is going to be the same for the next screen as well. These decisions up here, these are entirely within your control. This is your company, your price, your advertising, right? All your decisions. What we're trying to do here is develop a forecast for how many pairs of your shoes people are going to want to buy. Okay. Clearly, that depends on what you do, right? Depends on your price, but it also depends on everybody else's price. It also depends on everybody else's advertising. Okay. And so that's what you're doing down here. It's your assumptions about what the competition is going to do. So, what do you think next year's industry average internet retail price is going to be in North America? Okay. Um, Each year when you log into the system, there will be numbers populated here. The numbers that the system puts in here are last year's actual averages. Okay. Now, those averages are going to change because companies are going to change their decisions. Okay. The accuracy of your forecast, and this goes back to the conversation about production levels and the capacity, the accuracy of your forecast is going to be important for making good decisions in these other functions. And the accuracy of your demand forecast depends entirely on how accurate you are when you predict these competitive assumptions. Okay. We'll talk about it more in a second because you have to make the same kind of decisions, the same kind of forecasts in wholesale marketing as well. Okay. So this is your third distribution channel directly to the consumer via the internet. You've got to be concerned about what that means for your retailers. You have to recognize that it's a relatively small market. You have to think about how that fits into your broader strategic context. Okay. Next screen, wholesale marketing. Okay. This is, like I said, this is your bread and butter. This is, I don't know the number right off the top of my head, but this is going to be 80 or 90% of the market. It's going to walk into a store and buy shoes. Okay. Um, so same thing as before, except now you have more decisions to make. These entries up at the top, these are up to you. This is your company. What is your wholesale price going to be in North America, in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America? Okay. How much are you going to spend on advertising? How big of a rebate are you going to offer, if any? Right. That's a choice you make. What's your delivery time going to be? How much retailer support are you going to offer? Right. So, um, we've talked about price a lot already in class. We talked about advertising as being something which drives perceived value. If you're trying to be a differentiator, we already talked about this. You can have really high quality shoes, or maybe you have average quality shoes, but you do a really good job advertising. You advertise more than your competitors do, right? Um, Delivery time actually affects perceived value. The way this works is think about it in terms of styles, right? So you're talking about shoes, it's a fashion good. Let's say all of a sudden on a Tuesday, everybody in the world decides that yellow shoes are just the new hotness. Okay. So the retailers are going to place an order for a bunch of yellow shoes. Okay. If you promise them a 1 week delivery time, there's a better chance that you'll be able to capture that trend. You'll be able to take advantage of those changing uh, consumer tastes. Okay. If you offer 4 week delivery time, maybe the trend is gone. The fad is past before your shoes get to the retailer, so you miss out on that. So again, the faster the delivery time, the higher the perceived value, but also the higher the costs. Because if you take the extreme case where you're promising 1 week delivery time, um, when the retailer places the order, you have to have the shoes sitting there on the shelf, ready to go, right? If you offer a 4 week delivery time, when the retailer places the order, you can walk out to the factory, you can turn on the machines, you can make the shoes, you can box them up, you can send them, and you can still get them there in 4 weeks. Okay. What that means is the faster your delivery time, the higher the perceived value, but also your hot the higher your inventory carrying costs because you need to keep more shoes in inventory. Okay. And that's all a part of those calculations when you're up in the production screen and it's telling you based on your forecasts, here's how many shoes you need to produce this year. That's taking into account the sort of par stock or the minimum amount of inventory you need to carry in order to satisfy the delivery time decision that you've made on this screen. Okay, so again, what you're doing here is going to cycle back and affect what you do in production. Okay. Um, I guess it was all three. We'll leave, whatever. It doesn't matter. We're just playing here. Retailer support. This goes back to that. Why would a store choose to carry your products, right? If you support them, this is money you give to each of your retailers. Okay. You give them more money than they're getting from your competitors, then more of those retailers are going to be willing to carry your shoes instead of theirs. Okay. So that can work in your favor. Plus, the other thing to think about retailers, the retailer support rather, it also directly boosts perceived value because what are they doing with the money you're giving them? That's money that you spend to train them to be better salespeople, better understand your product lines, right? It's going to be money that you give them to put your shoes in a more prominent place in the store, right? Better displays, whatever. Okay, so again, The more retailer support you offer, the higher the perceived value. Maybe over time, the more stores that are willing to carry your product, but also there's cost associated with it, right? So when you look at the retail outlets, this is the number of stores willing to carry your product in North America, in Europe, and so on. Okay, that number will go up or down over time depending on all these factors that we're talking about. Okay, so you make these decisions in a way which best embodies the strategy that you're trying to execute. Okay, down here at the bottom, you have to predict what everybody else is going to do because, again, this is part of our demand forecasting process. Demand for your shoes does depend on your product characteristics, your advertising, your rebates, your retailer support, but it also depends on how yours compares to everybody else's. Okay, and if I need to later, I can make a little separate video to show the effects of uh, being wrong when you estimate these industry averages, right? When you make these decisions about competitive assumptions. But just think about it quickly. If you think you're going to be selling, let's say you're going to be a high-end company, um, you're going to make really high-quality shoes, you're going to advertise a lot, you're going to have a great image. You think people are going to be willing to pay a wholesale price of $80 for your shoes, okay? Um, Now we need to go back and do something about the online, right? Because this red button here is telling me that this price, uh, that's going to piss off the retailers because I'm cutting the legs out from under them online. Okay, so I'm going to have to deal with that. But let's say I still think that $80 is the right price in my wholesale channel. How many people are going to be willing to pay that price depends on the price and the quality and everything else that they can get from another company, right? And so if I think my $80 shoes are going to be competing with industry average $48 shoes, the fact that I'm above average, that is not a problem. There's nothing inherently virtuous about being average, okay? But the fact that that's the comparison, that's going to tell me something about the demand for my product, right? If I'm wrong about this wholesale price, if I'm wrong and the industry average really isn't 48, the industry average, let's say it actually turns out to be 60. I mean, that'd be a pretty big error, right? What would happen in that case? I thought my $80 shoes were going to be compared to an average $48. That gives me a certain estimate of what my demand is going to be, right? If in fact the industry average is 60, that means that my shoes aren't really as far above the average price as I thought they were going to be, which means they're relatively more attractive than I thought they would be, which means demand would be higher than I anticipated, which means my forecast would be overly pessimistic. I would not make enough shoes. Okay. And you can think through the same process if you think the industry average price is going to be $48 and it actually turns out to be 40. Now my shoes are more above average on price than I expected, which means demand will be lower than what I thought, and I probably will have overproduced. Okay, so being able to go back and once we have some reports to look at, I'll show you this explicitly. You need to be able to look at the reports and say, how good was our forecast? Was it we produced too much? Did we produce not enough? And most importantly, why did we make those mistakes and what can we do to avoid them in the future? Okay. Um, Something I've seen happen with a lot of companies in the past is, they'll have a forecasting error. So in year 3, they'll produce way too many shoes. And their reaction is in year 4, they'll lower production. Okay. That's a mistake. Okay. The reason you made too many shoes in 1 year is because your forecast was inaccurate. Your response to that should not be ignore the forecast. Your response to that should be fix the forecast, do a better job. Okay. Because otherwise, if you're not trusting the forecast, then how are you deciding how many shoes to produce? You're just sort of making up numbers. Okay. And that's not going to be effective. Okay. So, and fixing the forecast means fixing your estimates of the industry average, getting these competitive assumptions closer to what reality becomes in the next year. Okay. Again, something every company does. You have to forecast. You have to think about what the competition is going to do, and you have to make your decisions before you know for sure what they have done. Okay. And so this is a challenge, but it's a challenge for everybody. It's a good exercise to sort of go through. Okay. Um, so I'm gonna, obviously, once you make your decisions here, and I mentioned this in an earlier video, these are the decisions that are going to determine your demand forecast. So whatever you've done on the screens up to this point before you got to wholesale marketing and internet marketing, at this point, once you've made all these decisions, your estimates of the industry average, your price, your advertising, all those kinds of things, you're going to have to cycle back and go back to production because now you really know what your demand forecast is, which tells you how many shoes you need to produce. Okay, so I'll talk more about this whole sequencing of these decisions later. But no matter what sequence you choose to tackle them in, from a first draft kind of perspective, you will have to iterate. You will have to go back and revisit different functional areas as you go through these decisions. Okay. Let me go through one more before I stop this video, which is private label. This is basically your fourth distribution channel. Okay, so I'm guessing everybody has the experience of walking into a Walmart and maybe picking up a case of Sam's Choice Cola, right? The generic brands, Kirkland at the Costco or whatever. The private label is the generic. Okay, so it's basically there's not a factory out there that makes Sam Choice Cola. It's probably a Coca-Cola factory that produces this product and puts the Sam's Choice label on it. Okay, so private label operations, this is your opportunity to engage in that generic market. Okay, so a couple of things to keep in mind. Um, Number one, these are not going to be the same shoes that you produce for your branded production. Okay, you're going to make new decisions about materials and styling. Okay, um, another thing to keep in mind, even in the generic market, there are certain standards you have to meet with respect to quality. So what you're going to see here is each year there's going to be a global minimum. If you're going to play in this private label market, you have to sell or offer shoes that are at least 3 stars. Okay. Now, what I'm going to tell you is in the private label, they do care about quality to the extent that you have to meet the minimum, but beyond that, they could not care less. Okay. Producing shoes or offering shoes that are over the minimum does not gain you anything. All it does is increases your costs. Okay. So, what these buyers do is they say, okay, we're going to look at all the shoes that meet the minimum requirement of quality. And at that point, we're going to buy based on price. Okay. So we'll get to price in just a second. Another thing to keep in mind, um, one of the most spectacular failures I've ever seen in the BSG was a team of honor students who decided that they weren't even going to try to compete in the uh, branded production. They weren't going to try to compete online. They were going to sell all of their shoes in the private label. They were going to dominate this market, and they were going to just clean up. Right? It was an utter disaster because in the private label, what you do is you offer a price. It's sort of like a sealed bid auction. You offer a price to these retailers, and the retailers are essentially going to buy from the lowest bidders. Okay, and so what happened to this team was they didn't have um, the lowest bids, and so they didn't sell anything, and it became a huge catastrophe for them. Okay, so when you think about strategically, how does this fit in? How do you most effectively use this private label? What I'm going to tell you is the only reason this exists is to soak up excess capacity. Okay, so let's say you've got certain size factories, you've got a certain amount of equipment in your factories. That gives you a certain amount of capacity. You do your demand forecast for your branded production based on your internet marketing and your wholesale marketing screens. You produce the right number of shoes based on that forecast, and you still have some excess capacity left over. Like we keep talking about making efficient use of fixed assets, you're going to be better off. Your overall unit costs are going to be lower if you can maximize your utilization rate, right? The percentage of your capacity that you use. So if you have anything left over after you've scheduled your branded production, that's what you use this for. Okay. And in fact, it's telling me, and again, none of these decisions have been finalized on the other screens, but based on what the entries are there, it's telling me that I have enough capacity left over in my North American factory that I could make 767 pairs of shoes for the private label. Right. That's my excess capacity after I scheduled my branded production. In Asia, I've got 551 pairs. Okay. You might as well at least try to use that capacity. All right. So I'm going to tell you that you need to offer 767 pairs out of North America and 551 pairs out of Asia. Whatever these numbers are on your screens, whatever your excess capacity is, at least try to use it by bidding on the private label. Okay. Um, then you have to decide where you're going to put it. Okay, so are you going to offer it to North America? Are you going to offer it to Europe? That's entirely up to you. Um, it's a decision that has some um, interesting implications that we're going to talk about probably once the reports are available, right? And this really does go right back to that guess a number exercise that we did in class, because here's what's inevitably going to happen. Okay, you might think, all right, because of tariffs, because of shipping, because of exchange rates, because of all these things, um, all the private label shoes that I have available in North America, I'm going to offer them to North America because it's going to avoid all of those costs and things, right? Okay, great. Problem is, there's 11 other companies in the industry who might be thinking the same thing. And so everybody offers their excess capacity to the North American private label market, which means there's only so much demand. Some people won't have the opportunity to sell, right? We'll talk about all that more in a second. But meantime, there is private label demand in Europe, right? And nobody has a factory there, so nobody offers them shoes. Okay, great. So you have this huge surplus of shoes offered to North America. You have a huge shortage of shoes offered to the private label in Europe. Okay, great. Now, here's what's going to happen, and I'll show you this when the reports are available. You're going to look at the reports and you're going to see that dynamic. You're going to see that there was the surplus in North America. You're going to see that there was the shortage in Europe. And you're going to think, you know what we're going to do? We're not going to sell these private label shoes in North America. We're going to send them to Europe because nobody's selling there. We'll have the whole market to ourselves, right? Hopefully, you're thinking about that guess a number game and you're recognizing the fact that you've got 11 other companies that are seeing the same reports and are probably having the same thoughts. Okay. So, this decision of where to offer your shoes has to be based at least partly on your understanding of and prediction of what your competitors are likely to do. Not what they have done, what they're likely to do in the face of the information that everybody has available to them. And if you're able to think one or two steps ahead of everybody, then you're going to be able to find the opportunities in this private label that other people might not pick up on. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. All right. Then you have to decide wherever you're going to send the shoes. And let's say that we are going to just do the simplest, most naive thing, and we're going to offer all of our private label shoes into the market for their produced. Okay, that means I don't have to offer a bid price in these other markets because I'm not offering them any shoes. Okay, now I have to decide what's my bid price going to be. So 32 is the default because that was the bid price last year, but I could bid $40. I could bid $18. It's entirely up to me, entirely up to you. Okay. Something you do want to keep in mind down here is at this price, if I sell these shoes, what's my margin going to be? Right. So this gives me a $12 margin per pair in North America. This gives me a $6 loss per pair in Asia based on these prices and based on these decisions up here, which affect my cost of production and all of those things. Okay. Now, this is a sealed bid auction. You don't know what anybody else's numbers are until after the auction is over, okay, until after the purchasing has been done, okay. Now, I said that as long as you meet the minimum quality requirements from that point, the buyers only care about the price and they're going to buy from the lowest bidders first. So that might mean you want to be the lowest bidder, okay, except that's not entirely true. So let's say you do offer 3-star shoes, the minimum quality. Um, and you are the lowest bidder. Let's say $18 in Asia is the lowest bidder. Okay, you will sell these shoes. They will buy from you. Okay, so awesome. You sold the shoes you wanted to sell. The problem is, if you look right here, private label demand in Asia is for 2,712 pairs. You're only offering them 496. They're going to buy these because you're the lowest bidder, right? But that means there's 2,200 and some pairs worth of demand that you're not satisfying. So what does the market do? The market goes on to the next lowest bidder. So maybe the next lowest bidder was $25 and they offered 500 pairs, right? There's still 2,000 plus people, no, 1,000 some, who want private label shoes who haven't bought from either of the two lowest bidders. They go on to the next lowest bidder. Okay, so what that means is if you're the company that was the lowest bidder, you're going to sell your shoes, but you're also leaving money on the table, right? There were companies who bid higher than you who also sold their shoes, right? So what that means is you want to bid as low as you have to sell your shoes, but you don't want to bid any lower than that, right? And there's absolutely no way to gauge what that's going to be until you see what the other companies are doing so that you can get a sense for what their strategies are so you can better predict what their bids are going to be in the next year. Okay. And again, it's complicated because of the geographic dynamic too, right? A good bid in one region may be completely different than the right bid in another. Okay. So uh, excess capacity, make sure you meet the minimum quality requirement. The minimum quality requirement will change over time, right? Because the minimum standard for the private label is affected by what the industry is doing in the wholesale. So let's say all 12 of your companies go high end, you're all making 8, 9, 10-star shoes in the wholesale. That's totally fine. There's no reason to say that's a bad thing for anybody. But what that does mean is that in the private label, their standards are going to go up too. So when you make these decisions, just make sure you double check that every time. Okay. Use all your excess capacity. There's no sense in intentionally letting your factory sit there collect dust. Okay. Be smart about where you're offering the shoes and think carefully about the bidding process. Okay. The last thing I'll say, and before I cut this off, obviously we got to get to the point where we're talking about finance, right? Um, Down here at the bottom, this box, it's just a yes or no choice here. Does incorporate the projected outcome into your projections. Okay, so what I mean by that, let's say you bid 40 in North America and that bid was too high. There were over 2,600 pairs of shoes offered by other companies at a lower price than this. The market's going to buy from those companies and they're not going to buy yours. Okay, what that means is you're not going to get any revenue from this private label, right? I should point out, you're also not going to make the shoes either, right? So if you don't win the bid, you don't make the shoes. This doesn't contribute to your stock, your inventory, your warehousing, right? Um, but you may not want to count on when you do your pro formas, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is a finance thing. You may not want to count on revenue that you may not see. Okay, so generally, what I recommend people to do is leave these checked yes, so you can just see what the numbers look like in the private label, given your costs and given your bid prices. But before you move on, change all these to no. Okay, because that way, when you get to your finance, oh, okay, they changed this. In the old system, when you change this to no, it blanked out these numbers. So I guess you can leave these no all the time, and it's fine. If you make these no, that says I am not going to sell these shoes. So when I go look at my finances, I'm seeing a worst case scenario, right? I'm seeing a pessimistic revenue forecast instead of an optimistic one, which may turn out to be inaccurate. Okay, if I'm going to be surprised, I want it to be a happy surprise. I want to be surprised that I got more money than I expected instead of less. Okay, so um, I'm going to leave it at that for now. I'm going to come back and talk about these last couple of screens, um, and we'll go on from there. So if anybody has any questions, please, please, please don't hesitate to let me know.